Up next in the broadcast, in the ongoing drive to shake up her staff in response to shaky public confidence in a post-Sewol-ho ferry era, President Park replaces 4 senior secretaries with new cabinet appointments expected by the end of the week. The Bank of Korea freezes the nation's key rate at 2.5% for the 13th straight month as it assesses the risk factors in the global economy and sluggish consumption at home. The globally anticipated football tournament, the World Cup, kicks off in a matter of hours, and top Korean sponsors hope for high viewership, which means some very early morning cheering here in the nation. Primetime News begins now.
Hello and welcome to Primetime News. I'm Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us. In a shakeup of the presidential office we knew was coming, President Park Geun-hye replaced nearly half of her senior secretaries on this Thursday.
The moves are designed, her office says, to push forward with the president's government as well as economic reforms. Choi Yoo-sun introduces us to the president's new secretaries.
President Park has named Gender Equality Minister and former ruling Saenuri Party lawmaker Cho Yoon-sun as Secretary for Political Affairs. It's the first time a woman has been named to the post. The presidential office expects Cho's parliamentary and government experience to help her act as a bridge between the two sides. Ruling party lawmaker An Jong-bum was named Secretary for Economic Affairs. The tax, finance, and welfare expert played a key role in devising the president's election pledges. He is considered the right choice to lead the president's 3-year plan to revitalize the local economy. Former prosecutor Kim Young-han was appointed Secretary for Civil Affairs. Citing his contributions to establish law and order, the presidential office expects Kim to restore discipline in public service and to deliver public opinion to the president without filters. And former president of Seoul National University of Education Song Kwang-yong was appointed Secretary for Education and Culture. The president's close aide will likely be given the task of not only reforming the country's education system, but relaying the president's policies to the recently elected progressive education superintendents. While replacing half of her secretaries with close aides, President Park has confirmed confidence in the chief of staff, who has been criticized for the presidential office's recent series of personnel appointment failures and the government's lax response to April's ferry disaster. What's expected now is a reshuffling of the president's cabinet. While that announcement will likely come before President Park's overseas trip next week, uncertainties linger as controversy mounts over the credentials of her prime minister nominee. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
And it didn't take too long for controversy to erupt around President Park Geun-hye's second pick for her new prime minister. Just days after his nomination was announced, Changkeuk finds himself in the middle of a firestorm concerning public statements he made in the past few years. Now Hyun-kyung explains how this may rattle his confirmation process.
During a lecture at his church 3 years ago, Prime Minister nominee Changkeuk said Japan's forced colonization of the Korean peninsula in the early 20th century was part of God's will to awaken the Korean people. He added God also divided the two Koreas and that if the Korean peninsula had been an independent state at the time, the South would have settled on communism. At a lecture the following year, the nominee put his ultra-right views on display again, saying Korea was able to enjoy economic development by adopting technologies from Japan during the colonial era, adding that it was a geopolitical blessing from God. He also said Korea was liberated from Japan not because of the people's independence movement, but because it was granted to Koreans by the will of God. In response, ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Lee Won-gu said he believes the comments were not ill-intended, but a small group of junior lawmakers from the ruling party has called on Moon to step down. The opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's co-leader An Chol-soo also called on President Park to withdraw Moon's nomination, saying it will be the right decision if she doesn't share his views. The man in question said it was regrettable that his comments were misinterpreted, but at the same time seemed firm that he had no intention of apologizing. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
It was the main opposition party's turn on this Thursday to address the National Assembly, with their new floor leader putting inter-Korean relations and government reforms on center stage. The wide-ranging agenda also includes calls for fixing the aging nuclear industry and creating more social equality. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
Addressing a full National Assembly on Thursday, Park Young-sun, floor leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, called for an inter-Korean summit as soon as possible.
The National Assembly should create a special committee that will focus on preparing an environment for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula.
Park also called for reviving past agreements with North Korea, such as the September 19th joint statement of 2005, which calls on Pyongyang to give up its nuclear programs in exchange for economic and political concessions. The floor leader also pushed once again for a thorough investigation into April's ferry disaster.
An investigation without boundaries is the order from the people. The very first task for the National Assembly in the second half of the year is to conduct a thorough probe into the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy.
Park made a case for comprehensive reforms in the government and parliament, saying failures in the government system were one of the causes of the accident. She also sounded the alarm about the nation's aging nuclear power plants.
A nuclear power plant disaster is like an atomic bomb. The nuclear industry has been tarnished with corruption scandals, which sets the stage for a major accident like the ferry disaster.
The main opposition floor leader called for anti-corruption bills targeting high-ranking government officials to be swiftly passed at the National Assembly. She said that Korea's bureaucrats have long enjoyed landing jobs after retirement at companies and public institutions, which has contributed to the lax management of safety regulations. Park also pledged that the main opposition alliance would make Korea a better place to live by reducing youth unemployment, household debt, and the growing social income gaps. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea has kept its key rate at 2.5% for the 13th straight month. The central bank also says that it's keeping a close eye on the impacts of the April ferry disaster. Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Concerns over the ferry tragedy in April are spreading as it's slowing down the pace of Korea's economic recovery. While deciding to keep the key rate steady at 2.5% this month, Governor Lee Ju-yeol said Thursday that Korea's central bank is keeping a close eye on whether the ferry disaster will have a long-term impact.
If domestic demand picks up in the near future, I believe the economy will grow as we expected. We are closely monitoring the possibility that the ferry disaster will have a negative impact going forward for a longer period of time.
In its latest growth forecast, the central bank said the domestic economy will grow 4% this year. Based on the circumstances of the outlook, Lee made it clear that any future monetary decision would include a rate hike. Nomura analyst Michael Na, however, downplayed concerns of the ferry disaster and said the current key rate is very accommodative for the economy.
Export has picked up, but recently because of the ferry disaster, it seems like things have sort of halted, but I think that's only a temporary issue.
Na added that there could be a rate hike in the cards for Asia's fourth largest economy, which is heavily dependent on exports.
We do think that the global economy recovery is starting to accelerate, and we think that a timing of a rate hike will be sometime in first half next year.
Now, all eyes are on the central bank's next move in July, when it will release a new growth outlook and give a clearer indication for the path of a rate change. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
As the Korean won continues to gain strength, the country's export prices fell to their lowest levels in over 6 years in May. And this trend is likely to prevail for the time being. Our Yoo Ri-an explains.
Korean exporters saw their profitability decline for the third straight month in May as export prices fell to their lowest level since December 2007. The figure stood at 86.8, which is a drop of 1.6% from the previous month, according to the Bank of Korea. That means exporters were earning that much less when shipping out the same amount of products. The drop is attributed to the strengthening Korean won. The won rose 2% against the greenback last month when Korea posted a sizable current account for the 26th straight month. Foreign stock investors also helped push the value of the won higher as they brought the Korean currency to buy local shares seen as safe investment. Experts say the won is expected to keep strengthening against the dollar in coming months, given that the United States has no plan to increase interest rates anytime soon. Even then, they don't see any major decline in the country's exports.
A growing number of exporters, particularly conglomerates, have grown largely immune to currency fluctuations. And research results since 2000 show that the country's exports are not negatively affected by exchange rate changes. So I don't see much immediate impact on exports from a stronger won.
Hall adds, however, it's a different story for export-dependent small to medium-sized companies whose profitability has worsened since the global financial crisis in 2008. That could signal a widening gap between mid-sized businesses and conglomerates. Yurian, Arirang News.
Samsung is going strong when it comes to net sales. Samsung Electronics finds itself at the top of the global ladder. An annual report from Deloitte, which tracked the sales of 250 global consumer product companies, shows that the Korean tech giant raked in about $179 billion in sales around the world in 2012, the second straight year that Samsung came in at number one. It was followed by Apple and Nestle. And LG Electronics also cracked the top 10 with net sales of about $45 billion. Perception doesn't always match up with reality, and that holds true for the perception of middle-class living in Korea. A new survey of more than 800 people conducted by the Hyundai Research Institute shows that Koreans believe you're a member of the middle class if you earn about $5,000 a month and own a house over 115 square meters in size. That doesn't hold with the reality of the respondents, though. Their median monthly income stood at around $4,000, and they own a house totaling about 70 square meters. The Research Institute said Korean society needs to close the gap between perception and reality by improving the general quality of life. Curry's comments came in response to
your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Chae-ri from the heart of Seoul.
News begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
In 5 hours from now, the 2014 FIFA World Cup Brazil is kicking off in Sao Paulo with the opening ceremony as well as the first match of the event.
There have been protests, though, and concerns about the completion of the venues, but one thing is for sure, these games will be held in a country with some of the most passionate football fans on the planet.
And you know what? We have one of them in the studio. That is our sports scout, Song Ji-sun, joining us right here in the studio. You must be very excited.
Excited, and I'm very busy this year. It's full of events in the sports arena. And of course, the 2014 FIFA World Cup Brazil kicks off at 3:15 p.m. Thursday afternoon local time, with the opening ceremony followed by the opening game between host country Brazil and Croatia at 5 a.m. That will be Friday morning here in Seoul. Now, this match will mark the beginning of the month-long football celebration, with the group stage going on for 2 weeks. Of course, the home crowd will be rooting for their team to win another World Cup after bringing home the World Cup trophy for 5 times. In the 2 most recent World Cups, European nations have picked up the trophy, so the South American footballers are very eager to bring it back to their continent.
Well, let's talk about the Korean team. They don't exactly have the wind at their backs. They didn't do so well in their friendly matches.
Right, they have been losing for the actually in the friendly games. They lost their friendly at home against Tunisia 1-0 and then fell 4-0 in Miami against Ghana in their last rehearsal before the World Cup. Let's take a look back at Korea's performances in the past World Cups. Of course, they presented with a miracle finishing 4th at the World Cup held here at home back in 2002, but they haven't been so brilliant in other games overseas. In Brazil 2014, their first match against Russia was the key to boost the team's confidence and to earn game points ahead of Belgium and Algeria. Now taking a look at their lineup from the latest game, Arsenal forward Park Ju-young must now prove that he could score as a one-top striker. But more people are anticipating that the sensational Son Heung-min, playing the Bundesliga, could be the game changer, as well as the midfielder Ki Sung-young of the English Premier League's Swansea City.
No, but I don't think we're going to see that much of excitement this time around, at least here in Korea with the ferry disaster from April. I don't think that many people are going to gather in Seoul Plaza.
Right, and especially since it's early morning. But globally, the people who are really behind this event are hoping that there will be some economic benefits from these games, even though they're being held in Brazil.
Right, as you just saw in the schedules here, all the matches are scheduled to start in the very early morning hours here in Korea. That makes it very difficult for a lot of people to watch along with their friends like they did in the years past. While bars and restaurants may not be seeing much of a rise in revenue, TV makers start to benefit as people take this as an opportunity to upgrade their TVs so that they can watch the games in higher definition in the comfort of their own homes. For example, Samsung Electronics saw a 30% rise in UHD TV sales in May from a month earlier. It's also looking forward to a 100% rise for this month. But of course, the official sponsors would see the biggest returns. Hyundai Motor Group is the only automaker among the 6 FIFA partners. The automaker has been sponsoring the world's biggest football event for more than a decade now, and to maximize their return on investment, the World Cup itself must be a hit in terms of viewer ratings.
Both the US and Europe have less than a 4-hour time difference with Brazil. That makes it easier to attract potential market consumers to watch the games. Hyundai and Kia Motors have been launching new models in the US and Europe from March to July, which can maximize the promotional effect coupled with the World Cup.
Now, an analysis by Hyundai and Samsung Research Institute suggests that if Korea advances to the round of 16, the nation can expect $1.3 billion worth of brand publicity. But if they don't make it past the group stage, the effect will be a mere $450,000 US.
And of course, there's no price on the feeling you get when the Korean squad does do well and make some wins. Hopefully, we can continue cheering until July.
Exactly. And Jae-sun, thank you so much for that preview and looking forward to your other reports during the event.
Please do enjoy the World Cup.
Talks between the United Nations and Russia as well as Ukraine have yet again broken down over a gas price dispute ahead of a looming deadline.
With more on this story, we now turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, tensions between Moscow and Kiev continue to strain any diplomatic solution to the crisis in eastern Ukraine, and I'm sure this new gas issue only adds to the problem.
Absolutely. After more than 4 hours of intense negotiations in Brussels, energy representatives of Ukraine and Russia failed to reach a deal to supply natural gas to Ukraine. Russia's energy giant Gazprom has threatened to cut off supplies unless the government in Kiev pays its outstanding debts worth billions of dollars by June 16th. The two sides have been locked in talks after Moscow withdrew a gas subsidy following the ousting of Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych in February. On Wednesday, Russia offered a discount of $100 for every 1,000 cubic meters of gas, but it was promptly rejected. European Energy Commission, which is brokering the talks, said all three sides have agreed to hold another round of negotiations over the next 48 hours. Kiev has paid about $780 million of its gas bill at the start of last week, but has since said it will only pay more when an overall deal is struck. And turning now to the Middle East, Iraqi police have clashed with Islamic militants south of Kirkuk in an attempt to wrestle control of the oil-rich city. According to a police source, 10 militants were killed in the gun battle, while 6 policemen were wounded by sniper fire. Media footage showed the local police chief with a group of officers defending their position in the outskirts of the southern districts. Officials say Kurdish forces are in full control of Changkeuk, even after the federal army abandoned its bases there. The move came after Iraqi soldiers from the second largest city of Mosul, as several other towns and cities fell one by one to hundreds of Sunni insurgents, most of them from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, also known as ISIS. In a statement on Wednesday, ISIS said its fighters were now advancing on the capital, Baghdad. And heading back now to the World Cup, metro workers in Brazil's largest city of Sao Paulo have promised not to strike during the international tournament. The workers' union voted to suspend the walkout on Wednesday night, but they still plan to push ahead with protests across the city demanding higher wages. The union said its members would be taking to the streets on the day of the opening match on Thursday between Brazil and Croatia. The striking workers are pushing for a 12% pay rise, though the state subway company has made a counteroffer of 8.7%. The decision comes as the host country faces widespread disruptions to transportation from subways to airports. Other groups, including teachers and bus drivers, have also staged strikes in recent weeks to demand higher pay ahead of the games. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Chen. Well, as you heard before, the World Cup is kicking off in Brazil, but we can't forget there's another big event happening later this year. That is the 17th Asian Games in Incheon. And North Korea has officially joined in on Asia's premier athletic event. Organizers announced Thursday that North Korea submitted their athlete roster to the Olympic Council of Asia 2 days earlier. They're sending 150 athletes to compete in 14 sports, with the most competing in football, swimming, gymnastics, and weightlifting. Now, with all of the 45 OCA members registered, their rosters will be finalized by mid-August. And then we go to the 17th Asiad, which runs from September 19th to October 4th. And moving on, the NHL Stanley Cup Finals continue on. The New York Rangers edged out the Los Angeles Kings 2-1 in Game 4 to avoid the sweep. At the famed Madison Square Garden in New York City, the Rangers' Benoit Pouliot scored in the first off a deflection, followed by teammate Martin St. Louis in the second. The Kings answered back minutes later, but the Rangers were able to hold on to force a Game 5, which takes place Saturday at 9 a.m. Korea time in LA. And that brings us home for Thursday's top KBO matchup. The NC Dinos visited the Tusan Bears in Seoul. Now they're back in action after yesterday's rainout, and that takes us to the top of the first. NC's Na Sung-bum brings one home, and at the bottom of the frame, Kim Hyun-soo and Jorge Cantu connect for 2 Tusan runs. It's 2-1 Bears. Now we go to the second inning. NC's Lee Jong-wook brings one home, but in the bottom of the inning, Tusan answers back with another Kim Hyun-soo hit. Now from there, the pitchers cruise, but we go to the top of the ninth. NC ties it all up. Then in the bottom of the inning, bottom ninth that is, Min Byung-hun, he strolls home on a wild pitch. And at the end of this one, Tusan wins 4-3. And looking at the other games, we have Nexon defeating Samsung 7-4. Meanwhile, Hanwha and Kia are still in this one. Kia's leading 11-8 in the bottom of the 8th. Meanwhile, LG and Lotte's game was rained out. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
Today, more unusual weather conditions were experienced here in Korea.
And for more, we connect live to our Kim Bo-kyung standing by for us at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, what's the latest?
Guys, earlier today, those in Gwangju experienced a landspout, which is similar to a tornado. Well, what a rainy week we're having here in Korea. But tomorrow's round of showers, which will drop about 5 to 40 millimeters in most parts of the country, will most likely be the last one we'll get for a while. while. Now, all of this is a result of continued instability in the atmosphere. And adding to this, the nation will once again be at the edge of a high pressure front near Shanghai. Precipitation accompanied by strong winds and possible hail will stick around in the inland region, so make sure to have an umbrella handy. On to tomorrow's readings. Afternoon showers are forecast for Sewol, while Daegu and Gwangju hit 27. Busan tops out at 24. On to other places. Daejeon and Jeju peak in the mid-20s. Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reach 18. And that's all for me at this hour, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
Bo-kyung, thanks so much for that. And that will do it for this edition of Primetime News. Thanks for watching.
Have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you again at the same time tomorrow.